Jim Joyce,
It's been since June since
right?
I've heard
Like
the
we had to look it up. June 21st was our last episode. That's insane.
right, right. Well, we've been living in Europe for a while, so the idea of taking a full summer off isn't wild, right?
Well, except not on the entrepreneurial side of things, but on the podcast side for sure.
Right, right.
And for the listeners and the viewers that are joining us back, welcome back. And Jim and I kind of caught up on how do we, when we started this was in the midst of the pandemic, right? We all needed a
Right.
stage. That's why there's like 4
Yep.
million podcasters out there now or something crazy like
Right, right, right.
that. But June 21st, oh man, almost 2 months, right? That we didn't have almost. I mean, we're in September now
Right.
and quiet. Um,
It's funny. It's like we hit week after week after week, really for years, right? For 2
yeah,
years,
yeah,
for the guts of 2 years,
yeah.
and then and it's right, 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 right. Now I think so. What's our strategy now? So we've come up with our
All right.
strategy. We still think it's relevant and people need a shot of digital health. They just need it kind of, the dosing is going to be a little less frequently. It's not going to be
Exactly.
daily or
But we are
weekly.
going to commit to, let's just say, roughly once a month. But
Yeah,
not that we're going to do this Tim Ferriss style, but we're gonna,
yeah,
as usual, amazing guests. But we're gonna
right.
dive deeper and have kind of deep versus the 35 minutes or so. But
Yeah, it's like biologics, the biologics a weekly dose. Now we're going a monthly dose.
okay,
We'll see how
okay,
the
let's see
treatment
how it
if the
goes.
treatment sticks.
With that, I'm super excited to let our next guest in, who I met. Actually, I don't know if you know him, Mr. Dave
Mm,
Kerrigan, joining us live, almost live from good old Boston.
nice.
There he is, Mr. Kerrigan. Welcome, welcome.
Hello, gentlemen. How are you today?
Good, good. I was just before as I was pressing the button, letting you in. I was saying that you and I met, well, definitely pre-pandemic, and I was reminiscing. I think it's through our buddy Steve Aguilar. Um,
I was thinking of that
mistaken.
too. And there's probably a handful of people that might have introduced us, but I'm pretty sure Steve was the guy.
Well, the reason I remember this because we're talking about the shot of digital health therapy. I remember that Marina wanted some drink that is alcoholic but no calorie, something that only sold in Boston. And I think I met you and Steve at the bar, like an actual bar. But then you guys told me about some drink delivery service, and we had those drinks delivered to the bar so I can bring it home to Marina.
I mean,
Nice.
technically, you had to go to the entrance of the hotel. They couldn't actually bring it into the bar.
That's
But
right.
yeah, but
Right.
yes, that's
Good
exactly what
memory.
happened.
Well, with that, Jim, and
Great to meet Dave. Have we crossed paths before?
I don't know if we have. It's a pleasure to meet you.
This is I have to ask people like as I get older. Do I like have my family? Do I know you? Well, pleasure to meet you. I looked at your background. I'm really excited to get a chance to chat with you today.
speaking
Yeah,
of the
likewise.
background, take us all the way back, Dave. Give us your life story, and
Tell our millions of listeners who Dave Kerrigan is.
It was a Thursday in August, 1974. When I'm kidding.
Nice.
I'm one of those weird guys that actually kind of knew what I wanted to do in high school. I
Okay.
guess, I'll say high school. As I get into college, first semester freshman year high school, I was a healthcare administration major. I was like, I want to be in this business, the business of healthcare.
wow,
And post graduation, just about every job I had was somehow touching the health and benefits space. So when I say health and benefits, I worked at a hospital, I worked at a home care, I worked at two different insurance companies. I worked at the state of Massachusetts Health Connector, running their small group shop exchange under the ACA. Worked at two different brokerage firms, employee benefit brokerage firms. I was a former licensed insurance broker. And so in doing that, you kind of get to see the full spectrum of how, this United States healthcare system works, from the provider side to the insurance and coverage side to those that help facilitate that. And I suppose if we want to just kind of move through the career, I ended up, starting my own business consulting company and then launching a software company alongside that. So I've got now 2 companies that I run, and that's kind of the current situation of where we're at.
But when you were like 13 or you maybe younger, I'm just trying to get the ages that you're like 9 or something, and kids want to play like Little League, and you're like, I got to review my parents' benefits plans. Is it that level?
I wasn't that geeky. No, not quite that bad. I was,
Okay.
I was a high school and collegiate sprinter, so I was an athlete and enjoyed, and there's a
Well, those
competitive
skills.
side to me. But no, my
And did
dad
you?
was a hospital administrator. My mom was a nurse, so I got to see a lot of healthcare stuff at home. And
Okay.
a couple of times my dad would bring me into the hospital, and he was the chief operating officer of the hospital he was at. And
In Boston?
in Boston, yeah, it was St.
Okay.
Elizabeth's Medical Center.
Oh,
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that St. Elizabeth's in what is that? In Brighton or something?
That's
Is
right.
it?
That's
Yeah,
exactly
in
right.
Brighton. I have a cousin, a nurse, long-standing nurse there.
Jim, I thought you
Who
had
knows
like
St. Elizabeth's?
3 cousins. I thought that was the
Yeah, the
Irish
cousin.
thing.
Yeah. That's yeah. That's
There's only go your cousin from Boston, from the what is that, Sam Adams commercials.
yeah.
Um,
And there was a great Irish pub right next to St. Elizabeth's too. I don't want to take us off subject here. We haven't.
I mean, it is the
been doing this
shot.
There's a few actually. That whole area, Brighton, has a whole strip of
Right,
well, the reason I know this is because post-college,
right,
as I
right.
started out into this wonderful healthcare career of mine, I used to do a fair amount of Friday, Saturday nights. And, the Kells was the one that I used to go to pretty frequently back in the day, which wasn't too far.
So you were a sprinter, and you said, and you kind of taken after your parents, going right into healthcare. So you went, and then you started your own company up right away, like a consultancy company, or did you work in the space?
No.
Oh, no, in the
That's
hospital.
actually,
Sorry,
he fast,
in the
he fast
hospital.
forwarded. He was very humble about all the stuff. But
I mean, I grew up in an Irish Catholic family. I've got 7 brothers and sisters. You try to, I suppose, talk about yourself to an extent, because there was so many other people talking about themselves. You had to kind of rise above. But no,
Right.
I mean, I could walk you through all sorts of details, but I think if we're getting to kind of the crux of it,
Right.
when you're working, let me put it this way: when you're in a career and you think you're doing everything you need to do to get to that promised land, and for me, promised land when I was in high school and in college, and then post-college was like getting to a certain career, reaching a certain level, reaching a certain title, reaching a certain salary,
Right.
career driven, right? And I had achieved that by all accounts. I was, the leadership team of a private exchange at Buck Consultants Xerox. That's what they were known as at the time. I had a nice salary. By all accounts, I'd achieved all those things. But what had happened was years earlier, my dad, who I already mentioned, hospital administrator, someone I really looked up to, he got Parkinson's and dementia. And over the course of 6-7 years, just slowly faded away, And
Wow.
at the time when he passed away, which is back in July of 2016, I went out, of course, for the services. And when I returned to work, I don't know if we can swear on this, episode.
Go
here.
for it.
Try not to. My level for putting up with BS is what I'll say. It was
Right.
like it was gone. I went back
Yeah.
to work, and even though we were a small team, just a lot of corporate BS that can happen,
Right.
I just had zero tolerance for it. I guess I was faced with, passing of a father figure, looking at my own mortality, reevaluating, geez, I accomplished everything I thought I wanted to accomplish, but is this really it? And it really triggered something in me. And at first I was like, it's the grief, you lose someone important. This is what happened.
Sure.
Months later, I was still antsy and not, settled. And so at that point, I decided I was going to start a side business doing work with early stage companies, because years before that, I had gotten involved with, Mass Challenge Health Tech and Thai Boston Scale Up. And I was doing this volunteer work for different organizations that had accelerator programs and mentorships and things like that. as a guy who knew the benefit space, because that's where I really settled into my career.
Yeah.
A lot of folks didn't know that space. So I was the guy that would be asked to talk to the startups, the early stage companies about how to best do that work. So I decided, well, maybe I'll start a business and focus on it. So I actually, created a website, and then in January of 2017, filed the paperwork to create my consulting business.
Okay.
And less than 2 weeks later, I got laid off from my day job.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that was one of those, depending
had
on
a
how
premonition.
it was like
Right.
one of those, like, do you believe in science? Do you believe in God and religion and whatever else you want to say? But that was my dad was not a shy person. He was a pretty blunt and to the point kind of guy. You always knew where you stood. And I used to joke, if someone was leaning over the precipice of becoming an entrepreneur and diving in, I kind of gently started to look, and somebody pushed me.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure it was him. So yeah, I at that point was like, well, I think we're going to make a run at this.
And you
Awesome.
fall off the cliff, you got the wings and you started flying. And
Yeah,
I think
I suppose that's questionable. This is the stuff in entrepreneurship world that people gloss over. They just see,
Sure.
hovering, you dip, you hover, you gotta survive to thrive, as we've been saying. So lots
Right.
of downs, right? But it's interesting the time you started, right? If we sort of rewind back on kind of digital health and the startup, and I think Nick Dougherty was running the Mass Challenge at the time, if I'm not mistaken, right? There was a lot of stuff happening, right? And maybe a little bit back to, and still, right? I mean, certainly we're starting to see more of a graveyard, I guess, around it all. But the combination of hype cycle, lots of solutions, and maybe just kind of fast forward, I'm curious for our listeners on the benefit pitch, like what was the problem you were solving then? And maybe how did it evolve over time now, right?
Yeah. I mean, really, the evolution of that, I don't want to say it hasn't evolved, but I think what I was able to do is just gently keep tweaking a business model until I found that right fit. So when I started my business consulting company, which has this very funny name, it's called Santé Nasc. Santé is a French term for health. Nasc is a Gaelic term for link or connect. I happen to be Irish and French Canadian. My daughter's names begin with S and N. It was just one of those fun, I'm going to create a company, and bam, became the full-time job. I was about probably 2 to 3 months into that when I realized that I might be successful as a business consultant, but if I had some sort of software, if I could build something that I could license, that would be really,
Scalable.
a better situation. Maybe I could consult around it. And you go to what you know. And as a former broker and as a guy who's worked with vendors, what I knew was that brokerage firms, employee benefit brokerage firms, generally speaking, are incredibly fragmented in how they approach business. Each individual broker and each individual office for each individual firm across the United States have their own approach to talking to vendors, the questions they ask. And this is a big generalization, but generally speaking, they would all vet them a little differently. So as a vendor, I could talk to 5 people at the same brokerage firm, but in different offices, and they would ask me different questions. And not only would they ask me different questions, but they wouldn't share the notes of that call with one another. They're just really siloed. They're focused on their office, their book of business. And that's a really nightmare situation for any early stage company or any established company that's trying to sell in the benefit space.
Are those run somewhat independently then? Like an office in Boston for a company X versus, go a little bit north, or are they pretty independent?
They can be. This is getting into a little bit of the trends of this space, but over the last decade plus, benefit firms have been on an acquisition spree. The bigger firms snatching up smaller firms. And in some cases, you saw some bigger firms coming together. So I was part of Willis HRH that, was part of HRH and Willis coming together. And then they were bought by Towers Parent, or, merged with. So it was Willis Towers Watson now. A couple of years back, not even that long ago, Aon and Willis Towers Watson tried to do their thing and come together. It didn't quite work. Gallagher just acquired Buck Consultants. And these are big firms. The small firms are still on what feels like a daily basis getting bought by these larger firms. So
Dave,
thinking about that acquisition, they allowed them to operate very independently. They roll them under the mothership and the resources available, but sometimes they get rolled into a region, and those regions operate pretty loosely on how they manage those other business lines.
So Dave, we've got like of the millions of listeners and followers we have, we've got people from all over the world, with different levels of knowledge. So what is like in the I'm sitting in Ireland, what is a benefit firm, and then maybe what is BenefitPitch?
But Jim, first of all, you didn't tell me that are you Irish born and raised, or?
No, I'm a Bostonian that, didn't get the memo that people tended to move the other way. So I'm 20 years in Dublin, but similar to you, probably it sounds like similar background heritage wise.
You call yourself American Irish, right?
I'm American Irish.
I
I'm American
actually have my
Irish.
Irish citizenship. So I've been to Ireland before, but I'm a second generation removed. So my grandparents were both off the boat.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
We'll have to make it.
Donegal in that area. So
All right.
further north.
Next bar we
Yeah.
meet at will be in Dublin.
We
There
just
you
had
go.
we had 40,000 Americans here last weekend, or like about a week ago, and for the Notre Dame Navy game, at Aviva Stadium, Dublin. So it was like one of the biggest Irish American events ever in the history or something like that. So, anyways, so coming back, like for the what is a benefits firm? Why do we need them? And then what is BenefitPitch? Maybe is that
Yes.
just to kind of ground?
Pitch the benefit pitch. No.
I'll explain it this way. In the United States, employees of an organization get access to health insurance through their employers for the large part. So more than 50% of Americans, if they're not covered by government, which is basically the other 50%, Medicare, Medicaid, it's commercial insurance and people get it through their employer. Most employers, vast majority, 95% plus, work with an employee benefit broker or consultants to help procure their benefits packages. And benefits packages are things like your health insurance, your dental insurance, your vision, short-term, long-term STD, long-term care insurance if you need it, and then anything else under the sun that an employer might offer to employees as, perks and other things to get them to want to work there. And historically, those were very basic things that happened out of kind of a combination of two things. One is post-World War II trying to make, workplaces more desirable. And then second, I want to say it was a combination of a university and a hospital in Texas that was trying to insure the students. So they just had them all go to the university to get the healthcare that they needed. And so these kind of two themes came about. Fast forward how many years, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. And the United States ties health insurance coverage and access to insurance to your employer. And these benefit brokers and consultants work with employers to help them put together an attractive benefits package to attract and retain employees. And to another extent, without getting too deep in the insurance space, insurance is either fully insured, which is you're pooling your risk with all of the other people of an insurance company, or you're large enough as an employer that you self-fund, you are now a risk-bearing entity. And when you do that, which is, I'll say typically it's generally, been 500 to 1,000 employees these days, going much, much lower. But when you become a risk-bearing entity as an employer, that benefit broker becomes very important because they're going to help with a lot of the strategies. And they're going to help identify all of the different solutions, call them point solutions, vendors, that employer may need or want to make that place an attractive place to work and to retain talent and to control costs. Because if you have a large population of folks who have diabetes or musculoskeletal issues or whatever it is, you can put vendors in place that when those vendors are engaged, you can mitigate risk, reduce risk, keep people healthy, and drive your costs down as an employer.
So benefit
Awesome.
pitch, then I'm going to try to do your pitch and then you correct.
Go for it.
Benefit pitch, and we are on the platform. So we actually just went back in, Maureen and I, to update it. But you sit between that brokerage community, individual brokers or groups of brokers, and the service providers, partners, whether it's startups, companies in general that are providing services to these companies.
That is a great description. Yep.
Okay.
Think of it as this. There was no classification or system where people could go to search for this stuff. The benefit brokers generally kept it in some sort of spreadsheet, but that data and information's out of date as soon as that spreadsheet is closed for the day. If you offer a new service where you work, Eugene, and brokers don't know about it, good luck selling it. You're gonna have to talk to them all again. And they're, as I mentioned, siloed and fragmented and hard to reach. So BenefitPitch is like a living, breathing, we call it an RFI, request for information. The data in there is not name, contact information. It's a lot of information about the companies that we collect for each company. And
So your customers are, in this case, who's your customer?
we actually have both. We have benefit brokers and
They
consultants.
double dipping.
The benefit brokers and who?
And the vendors, like, we call them vendors, solution partners, the solutions that offer those services to the employer.
Okay.
Employers generally don't shop for this themselves. They generally rely on that broker. So we work with the brokers to help put all of the information about all the different vendors in one central system. And then we took it a little step further by effectively building a vendor management system around the vendor data and then licensing it to the brokerage firms as a vendor management system. So the larger brokerage firms that have many, many offices and many people and really fragmented and don't store that information, they now have a solution. So,
and you're such a good, like, I loved the way you described the benefit system, the creation. So like, what would a typical vendor be?
yeah, that's there. We have what we call service types, which are categories. And I think we're nearing 400 of them.
Wow.
There was a vendor today that I talked to. They're like, do you have any category for offboarding? And the answer is we didn't, but now we do. So the idea is if you are moving people from employment into unemployment, what are you doing for them? And these folks offer a service in that space. And now we have a category for offboarding, but it could be, big buckets are like HR technology, which actually offboarding is part of, but things like hiring and retention, payroll, benefit administration, those are HR systems that are used in that hiring process and learning and development process. Then there's the benefits that are offered to the individual employees that if you're an employee of an organization, you could have a musculoskeletal benefit. We talked about diabetes as a benefit, popular benefits these days, pet services, caregiving services, services around like open enrollment, things like that, decision support, health and well-being, of course, coaching, of course. There's, behavioral mental health, big category for us. And then even into the financial space. So retirement, planning for retirement, financial wellness, all of that stuff.
So you've got 400. You've got 400 of these vendors in your database.
Well, not exactly. So I mentioned categories. So those are the different categories. We've got more than 1,200 vendors.
Okay, wow.
In the BenefitPitch marketplace, call it. And the way we license it to brokers as this vendor management, we now have more than 13,000 benefit brokers, consultants throughout the country that use the service today.
Wow. So you got 13,000, and then they can go into your database of vendors and say, hey, help us. I want to design, I want to see what's out there because we've got a demand or a request, from our companies, or we want to try to pitch. Is that kind of?
Yeah, pretty close. I mean, if they're helping to do the planning, what they're going to be doing is sitting down with the heads of HR and the CFO of these companies and say, what is your focus for, 2024? And they're going to say, you know what, last year we put in a benefit for, behavioral mental health, and we put in a benefit for, families and things like that. But this year, 2024 and beyond, we're thinking we need to do more in this caregiving space. And by the way, it's probably time to look at another, dental provider. We've been with this provider for 7 years, and it's probably worth just looking at the market to see what else is out there.
Interesting.
So they'll help with what they call market their insurance programs. So they'll go to a bunch of, health vendors, health insurance vendors, or, companies, or dental insurance companies, whatever it is, and just kind of say, this is what we do, this is what we need. Show us the rates, and they'll try to get a better deal, and try to get the best deal is generally what they're trying to do. But in addition, all of the different point solutions that make up the other parts of the benefits package, there's only so many health insurance companies and so many dental companies, but if we searched, behavioral mental health and BenefitPitch, there's 150, 200 plus something vendors there.
Wow.
Benefit brokers and consultants aren't going to do an RFP for that. They're going to need to narrow it down on criteria and figure out what types of vendors are the right types of vendors for whichever client it is. Some clients might need a really light touch something. Someone might need a really in-depth something. They need full-blown, coaching in person, assessments, cognitive behavioral
Yeah.
therapy, whatever it is in a particular category.
So you're vetting those, so the ones that the 1,200 or something that end up in your database, you're interacting with them and helping vet them to a level, or
Little difference. We effectively allow the benefit brokers and consultants to vet what they need. So all of the
Okay.
information the vendors put in is kept up to date by the vendors. So Eugene mentioned
Yeah.
when he, get started
Yeah,
a few minutes ago that, he and Marina
we
just
have
logged in
our,
and updated the information.
we have our work sessions, Marina and I, and I think
Yeah.
for the last 3 days, we've been spending like 25% of our work session just going through the very detailed updates. And you've changed quite a lot actually, to the better, right? Like as far as just more details.
Yeah, adding users, adding products.
Yeah.
We're making it a little easier for the vendors to put out there what they're selling and promoting and offering. And then as
Awesome.
a broker, if I come in and I'm looking for, coaching, which includes in-person and virtual, if I need, whatever it is, I can combine all different search terms, service types, et cetera, things like that to narrow a list. And not only that, but let's just say that Eugene's group works in all segments, but one of his competitors only works with groups between 1,000 and 5,000. If I'm a 200 life group and I'm searching on that segment, those other companies go away, and the only ones we see are the ones who work in that segment.
That's
so
awesome.
It makes it easier for the broker versus calling up, talking, and then realizing, sorry, no, we don't work with groups that size. Thanks, click, and then have to call them again. Call another one and see, do you work with groups of size? No, sorry, thanks. They can use the system, the BenefitPitch system, to really narrow down that list and begin their own, what I call vendor search, sort, filter, and discovery and outreach. So they can begin that process of getting to know the vendor to see if it's a good fit for their client.
So let
Awesome.
jump to, so again, the problem you're solving for the brokers, you're solving a problem for discoverability for, the partners like ourselves. Let's talk a little bit about what's been happening in the marketplace, right? You kind of mentioned lots of point solutions have grown over the decade plus. We've seen a consolidation in this digital health space, right? I don't know, name almost any larger company that's been around for a decade. They've been acquiring everything from MSK or Payne, just adding solutions on one side. On the employer side, it's always a choice, I think, do you get the best of breed, right? Or just one throat to choke. And I think in the beginning, it was sort of like best of breed for certain solutions. So I'm curious what you've seen on both sides of that marketplace. Yes, the brokers are your let's call it resellers ultimately of those services, but
yeah, I call them buyer influencers. They don't ever resell. Well, in some instances they resell, but generally they're the one making recommendations based on something. The employer is still the one who signs the contract and who pays the vendor. But you're asking about what's been going on. I jokingly have said to people, this industry has whiplash. Prior to COVID, it was like a benefits arms race. Everybody, including industries that aren't necessarily particularly competitive, meaning you expect a white collar, professional services firm or a tech company or a life sciences biotech organization. They're competing for talent, really good talent.
Right.
They have to offer good benefits, have to. Because if I'm a scientist and I'm in demand, I'm going to look for the right company. And part of that right company definition is, what do you offer? If my wife and I are looking to have kids and you don't offer fertility benefits, going over here to your competitor who offers fertility benefits. Back, prior to COVID, there were companies that were not in as competitive space, but yet, employees were like, I don't want to work here. I want to work somewhere that they deliver lunch every day. I want to work somewhere that has this. And so, employers and benefit brokers were really chasing, call it best in breed. I mean, and by the way, this also varied by location in the country. Anything in California, Silicon Valley, holy mackerel, talk about an arms race. And that
was like everything in the kitchen sink and
everything in the kitchen sink. I mean, geez, I was hearing companies that come to your work during work and change your oil.
Right.
I'm like, how do you like that? They change your oil while you work. It's like change your windshield while you work or whatever it is. So that was what it was like, kind of the pre-COVID. And
we had like at Health Beacon, when we first started, we had an exercise program where we Made people put together IKEA furniture for the conference room.
That's a great one.
I don't know. I don't know if that would cause mental health stress or depending on the personality.
It's
type. Oh,
kind of
man,
team building.
I can only imagine. I can't read these instructions. They're just
Right.
pictures. You know?
Exactly.
There's no words. Oh man. So around that same time, there was also the proliferation of investments in digital health. And you know this, billions of dollars with a B each year between, I don't even know how far back, but 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, the number just kept going up. Every year, more investments in this space, which meant a flood of new vendors, which meant for brokers and employers, a flood of new things to evaluate and know about, right? So that was kind of part of the impetus of what, BenefitPitch needed to be for the industry. Then we're faced with a, global pandemic. People laid off, people let go, people now working remotely.
Yeah.
Right. And so everything constricted very quickly. And there was an intense focus on get rid of everything except for what works. And by the way, the definition of what works varies, but if it's supposed to save money, did it save money?
Right.
Is it supposed to drive engagement? Did it drive engagement? Like, and if those things weren't happening, it was like, cut it, get rid of it. We're not dealing with it. And then as the pandemic went on, people started to come back to work. Employers started hiring again. People were still out of work, but government programs were providing dollars and subsidies to stay at home. So then it almost became that, I don't want to say a benefits arms race again, but I was having a conversation with a broker who's working with a hotel organization, and they were trying to get some of the frontline workers back. And they were lower wage workers. They were on subsidized, programs for the, pandemic credits and whatever else was out there. And, he was asking me, what would you do? And I was like, there's programs for pay on demand. They get paid the same day they work, up to 50% of their paycheck. And he's like, didn't even know that existed.
That's cool.
I'm like, yeah, it's kind of a neat benefit. And it doesn't cost an employer anything in most cases. It's integration with payroll and time and attendance and a small, transaction fee when the employee takes it out. Great way to, put that on a job application and let folks who are lower wage know you don't have to wait every 2 weeks for your paycheck.
That's fantastic.
So yeah, exactly. Really cool stuff out there. But even that, people started to come back to work. And I was thinking, right now we're headed to, recession again, potentially, there's inflation, there's this. And yet behaviors, there's a workforce dynamic, I'm a Gen Xer, but the baby boomers and Gen Xers, I was the kind of guy that was raised, if you got a good job and it's a tough economy, stay put up with it, don't leave. Younger generations, Gen Z, Gen Y, whatever, they're like, I'm not happy.
Don't give a shit. Don't give a shit.
Not happy here, gonna leave.
Right.
And that puts the employer in a really tough spot because they need to watch their dollars because they're still in a constricted economy, but they still have this incredible challenge of, attracting, retaining talent.
And the whole quiet quitting, right? That's
right.
Sort of been a topic as of, I'd say, last year or so, right?
Yeah, I always find that the industries tend to, I'll say the word glom onto. I don't mean it in a bad way, but there's things that arise. The fact is that probably was happening years before. Someone just called it something and it stuck, right? Keeping an employee happy is very hard.
Digital health, right? The term digital health.
Yeah, I did digital health. Oh yeah, that's a very clear definition of what exactly.
Wait, Eugene, did I ever? I know we hadn't done the podcast in a while, but did I tell you that the dream I had? Like I woke up and I wrote the notes down of this dream I had where I was in a company and I'm working in a cubicle, and I went over and asked someone, there was this kind of very cool, manager, and I walked over to her and I said, yeah, hey, when do we get paid? And she's like, oh, we don't get paid. We work for purpose, and I'm like, well, I gotta, I want to meet the boss. And they're like, and they told me who the boss was. I'm like, well, he died like years ago. And they're like, no, he still runs the company, even though he died 5 years ago.
Yeah, you should say that for one of the Health Excel dinner jokes.
I'm just thinking that's like a perfect situation from an employer. You can't complain up the chain. People. It's like, wow, they've got you, don't they?
Mhm.
But Dave,
Um,
if you looked at all the like what you know in your database, and I don't know how much like longitudinally, you must be such an early indicator for employer sentiment, right? Like so when you see because when you start, like I think about it like Eugene, when you start focusing on employee benefits and take the time to do that, it's an indicator for like how is the employer feeling about retention and employees and are they're obviously it's not core to their business acquisition, so they're thinking about other side. It must be really interesting if you mapped it.
Yeah, it's funny. We're just now starting to get to what I would call kind of a next generation data layer.
Okay.
And every month we track information, and I can look back, year, 2 years. Over the last year to 2 years, in any given month, behavioral mental health, EAP, stress resiliency, these are categories we have. They were always kind of 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. What was interesting is pet services was always somehow in the top 10, always cracked me up.
Wow.
And I think it was, EBN, Employee Benefit News, just had an article this week or last week that talked about caregiving services and pet services are what people want in 2024. And I'm like, I could have written that article based upon the information
Right.
I have. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to read you right now the top 10 categories over the last 30 days. Number one, pet services.
Wow.
2,
Wow.
EAP, stress and resiliency. 3 is financial, defined as HSA, FSA, HRA, which is health savings account, flexible savings accounts, and health reimbursement accounts. Fertility services, student loan services, leave management, childcare services, family benefits, translation services,
Huh.
and ID
Ooh.
theft. Now,
I
knowing
I
the
did.
employee benefit space, it's not a surprise to me at all to see translation services, because this industry is heading into what's called open enrollment.
Yep.
Most large employers, or many employers, renew on January 1st of each year. And this is the time where they're putting together packets of communications that roll out in the October-November timeframe to discuss what was selected and will be launched for 1/1/24. And
Yeah.
if we have employees of different various,
Yep.
languages and like backgrounds,
Yeah.
guess what you need? You need translation services. So again, it doesn't surprise me at all to see it in here. That will be a spike around this time of year that probably won't see again until next year at this time.
Fascinating.
Amazing.
In all these, I know I won't ask. This is a fascinating space to me, Dave. But is all these digital health point solutions or solutions, or Eugene and I run company, I guess broadly defined digital healthcare companies. Do you deal with at that level? Like, are you looking at like a Livongo or an Amada or like a Propeller, like these kind of companies? Are they also in your system?
They are, yeah.
Okay.
The way I look at it is they can be as early as they've got a product to sell.
Got it.
Every vendor that comes through, I put a layer of vetting. It's not like a deep,
Sure.
I'm not gonna put them through the ringer on it. And the reason I do that is twofold. One is there's just not enough time with each vendor coming in daily. I can't vet everyone deeply. But as a guy who's a former benefit consultant, I know what to look for. And when I say know what to look for, people say, well, I don't think this vendor's any good, Dave. I said, yeah, you don't, but you know what? Your competitor who has a small group that just needs a really basic solution, it might be the perfect solution for them.
Right.
Who am I to say that's not a good vendor? I can't. It might be the perfect solution for the right sized group, and it might be a really small group that just wants to check a box. That's their decision, not mine. So I don't want to be the preventer of putting that service in BenefitPitch. Where I will prevent them from going in, or at least pause and say, do you need to chat? If I have questions about, pricing or implementation, they're like, it's a free download in the App Store. I'm like, all right, you've never worked in the benefit space before. I can tell because of your responses. And then I know they're not, what I would call game ready. And I usually pull them aside and have a conversation and say, listen, but this is used by benefit professionals for big brokerage firms representing employers of all sizes across the United States. If someone were to reach out to you, you need to be prepared to sell in this industry. Are you prepared? Do you know this? And I kind of give them a little crash course. And in some cases, they're like, oh yeah, no, we're not ready for this yet.
Right.
Which frankly, sometimes is where my consulting business can come in. I don't do a ton of consulting anymore because I'm so busy with BenefitPitch, but my business consulting company is working with brokerage firms on innovation topics and working with early stage companies on call it the
Solutions.
go-to-market strategies for the employer space.
But you also,
Awesome.
to your point, yes, the solution is the right solution for the right broker and ultimately the right size employer. But to your point, you can't catch it all, but you said 13,000 plus brokers on the system that I'm sure will be continuously feeding back as well, right? And so it's almost like a self-checking system in a way. But before we dive to the last question that Jim usually has, I do want to ask about this wonderful masked broker and the amazing concept you came up with, animation. But you tell us. I actually enjoy those little videos personally.
I'm glad you do. I've always been a guy who doesn't do things in a traditional way. Boring is boring, and folks are like, will you do a webinar? I'm like, I hate to say it, webinars are boring. Not everyone, of course. If it's your company, of course, I'm interested. If I'm really interested in service, it's an interesting webinar. But just putting a webinar is like, a lot of brokers like, please, not another webinar. And so my challenge was, how do I convey information relative to the field, important to the field, relevant to the field, that is in a way that people want to consume it. And so the first thing I used to do is the benefit pitch sells out videos, which was kind of a, Dave's going to sell out today, and who's it going to be a sellout for? Your coach, you know what I mean? That type of thing. And I interview Eugene, and we do this sort of Jimmy Fallon meets employee benefits, where I ask him about his upcoming movie. But after the commercial break, we might do a dance competition. So I ask companies about upcoming, their product, their service, and then we do something wacky and funny. And it was a lot of fun to do, but it wasn't as consumable. People were not watching it as much. People who did watch it enjoyed it, but it wasn't widespread. So I figured too long, format not quite right. And so I started to have brokers say, Dave, we get contacted by so many vendors. Could you just help us, tell them the right way to do things? Because they do it wrong. They do this and they do this. I'm like, well, why don't we do a podcast or a video or something, and you can tell them? And they were like, well, for two reasons, I don't know that I want to do that. One is, I don't want to be bad-mouthing our vendors. And it's not necessarily bad-mouthing, but there are some pretty outrageous stories if you watch them or what happens, which cracks me up that they actually happen, but it is what it is. But the other one is, they're like, also, Dave, if my face and name and firm is out in your world, there are 1,200 plus vendors that are going to see it. I'm going to get inundated with emails and contacts. He's like, I don't want that either. And so I said, well, what if we masked you? And they were like, what do you mean? I'm like the mask, mask broker. And so working with my outsourced marketing group, Excelity, we came up with a concept. I said, what if we threw, some sort of a thing? And we came up with really clever ideas. My favorite one was a talking potato. If you Google talking potato avatar, it's the funniest thing you'll ever watch. It gets like eyebrow shrugs, and it's hilarious, but it's a download and all this stuff. I'm like, nah, the brokers firms, I know their software, their IT, they're not going to let them download these other things.
I'm going to share this.
We went with what we had, which was avatars on Zoom.
Kerrigan, the creator of BenefitPitch, and I'm pleased to bring you the Masked Broker, a series where we interview brokers.
News and information available
This is
everywhere. Come in the door and don't know what we do and don't have a general idea of how our organization is set up. That's really a negative. I'd say.
Oh, look at that, Dave.
This is how we do it. So I'm talking.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and we do a combination of the animal in the background, and then we just call it something funny, and polar bear in the beach, and X Foxy and wolf in the woods, and we just reported one recently, which was pink rabbit in the garden or something like that. I forget what we called it, but the brokers love it because they're able to freely share some of the things that vendors should and should not do. And what was interesting is the other side, our vendors, our solution partners, really, I get regularly reached out to saying, Dave, this is gold. This is perfect. I didn't know this. Keep it coming. And so it's like, fantastic. So we're just going to keep doing it until it's not worth doing anymore. And then we'll figure out something else to do.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Great.
That's awesome.
On that fun note, Jim, floor is yours with your famous questions.
Okay, Dave, let's go back in the way back machine. So you're coming out of, we'll put you forward. So you've built up BenefitPitch this phenomenal success, and every broker using it, and the best solutions are being pitched into employers and benefit managers as a result of how you've curated the system. Employees are staying healthier, living longer as a result of the service that you're offering. And you're giving a keynote speech just outside of St. Elizabeth's in Braintree. And afterwards, a couple people say, hey, let's go to the local Irish pub around the corner, and your family, your 7 siblings want to meet you there, and they want to hear about how the keynote went. And they're talking, and you're sitting there, and young, good-looking man looks over. He's kind of his lights, his kind of Irish skinned guy. He's a little sunburned from the day, and he comes out and he says, "It's Dave. You like, I have to talk to you," and you don't know who this person is, and he sits there and he lashes at you, and he just pitches you this awesome new AI-driven benefit pitch massed system aggregator technology. And you look at this young, talented executive, that this idea, what's the one piece of advice would you give to that young Dave Kerrigan starting off?
Yeah, I don't know that it's one piece, because you can imagine there's 1,000 things you could tell somebody. I'm going to write a book, I think, one day on basically how not to start a business. And maybe the one way you did do it work, because so far for me it's working. But I think one of the biggest things I would tell anyone, and I do this with the companies that I mentor and advise anyway, you do get pitched. We've got this great idea of a AI-based I said, great. What problem are you solving and for whom? And it just starts with as simple as that. The statement is, don't be a solution in search of a problem. Because if you are, you're barking up the wrong tree. Now, listen, there's a history, albeit really small, of success, I should say, of a company. Like when Steve Jobs created the iPhone, they were flip phones and they work fine. But for some reason, he had this mind that was thinking, we put apps and we do this and it'll be amazing. It worked. And if that happened years ago, I probably would not have invested, because I would have been like, what problem are you solving? Phones work just fine. Why do you need apps? They have internet. And like all the things that probably shouldn't have worked, yet worked, and now here we are. That's a rare instance. For the rest of the entrepreneurs out there, you really got to know your space and know who your customer is, what problem you're solving, and how you're solving it. Because if you're just saying, I have an idea, and I talked to 3 friends, and so it's an N of 1, N of 2 that you have as a comparison point, you're on a track for potential failure. You got to know your customer base. You got to know your problem you're solving. So don't be that solution in search of a problem. I guess would be the best advice. The other part is get comfortable being uncomfortable, and there's never a good time. So if you're going to do it, take a chance and do it.
Awesome.
Mr. Kerrigan, honor and
That was
pleasure,
awesome.
as always. And
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate you having me. I was looking forward to this.
over and out.
Pleasure to meet you,
Thanks,
Dave.
guys. You as